In the 1950s in the United States of America, there were over 100,000 butcher shops, and today there are less than 7,000, which is an astonishing decline in a relatively short space of time. Where did all the butchers go? Here in New Zealand, much the same thing has happened. When I was a little girl in the early 90s, I used to love going to the local butcher shop, which was right here in my town, and I remember it very fondly. The butcher would always hand me out a little sausage to eat when I went in there with my mum. There was a mural on the wall that had a little dog running away with the sausages and the butcher chasing him. It was just a really, really nice experience, and that has essentially gone now for most of us. I mean, this isn't a blanket statement. Butcher shops do exist, but they are few and far between. There have been butchers for as long as there have been people. Butchery predates recorded history. We have been producing, cutting up, eating meat for as long as we have been people. In ancient Egypt, butchers were resident in households and in temples, and they provided meat both for religion and for people to eat for their food on an everyday basis, if you were lucky enough to be able to afford meat regularly. The Greeks and the Romans also had special marketplaces for butchers to be in. It was a very respected craft. As we move through to the Middle Ages, the Europeans had guilds for butchers. It was a very respected and powerful guild, and there were apprenticeship systems. You could become a master craftsman as a butcher. It was a really, really important thing that people did, and it was very valuable. And as we sort of skip through into the modern period, the golden age of butchery and the local butcher's shop was in the late 1800s and into the early 20th century, where every town had multiple butchers, and people had going to the butcher as part of their everyday life. Because you've got to remember, back then, running into like 1920, early 1930s, people didn't generally have refrigeration in their houses yet, and they particularly didn't have freezers. Domestic freezers is a fairly recent phenomenon in human history. So people would have to go to their local butcher every day or every few days because they couldn't just keep meat fresh at home like we can do today. Even after refrigeration at home became more common, the butcher was a fixture in everyday life. People didn't at this point go to the supermarket because supermarkets were a really, really new concept. You would go to town to run your errands, you would go to the butcher, you'd go to the baker, you'd go to the greengrocer, and these were people that were part of the people you knew. They might be your friends, you had a relationship with them, and the butcher could provide you with advice on things you were planning to cook. They had knowledge about you and your family and what your likes and dislikes were. So all of that was part of the relationship that people had with the local people serving the needs that they had. And that is something that we really have lost today. So as we move forward into the really modern era, we start to see the decline of butchers. And that goes along with the decline of lots of small single-use businesses like the greengrocer or the baker. These things started to be packed into supermarkets. So particularly in the post-war era, so we're moving into the 50s and the 60s now, supermarkets became a bigger thing. Supermarkets were invented in the 1930s, but they really came into their own with the suburbanization of people once we got through past the Second World War, where suburbs just started expanding across everywhere. And what suburbs do is, while they provide nice places for people to live, they break down the village, the town concept that people lived in before. Suddenly you have just house upon house upon house of residential without the services interspersed like they used to be. And supermarkets came to serve these suburbs. So instead of pottering a short distance to the main street of your town to go and get all of the things that you needed, going from one shop to the next, you just got in your car, a relatively new concept, everybody driving around in cars. You got into your car, you drove to the supermarket, and you got everything you needed there. A lot was changing during this time in terms of our culture and how we lived our daily lives. Incidentally, this is also the time period where chickens became industrialized. This is when laying hens and eating chickens became differentiated and specialized and became factory farmed. And factories play a role in this whole butchery story because massive industrialized factories could be built to process and pack meat. So instead of a local abattoir processing animals and a local butcher taking small numbers to cut up and sell very quickly, suddenly we had massive slaughterhouses packaging huge volumes of meat to send to factories that would cut and pack them to much more simplified cuts that would then go to the supermarkets, and the supermarkets would then package and sell that meat. And even some factories, which today is the case as well as back then, would cut the meat all the way to the direct consumer size and send it to the supermarket. So all the supermarket had to do was put already packed and cut meat onto the shelves. What this meant was that over time, supermarkets didn't have to employ skilled butchers anymore. They first of all got sort of simplified meat that still needed chopping and packing and presenting, and people would still ask questions from the butchery department at the supermarket. But over time, those cuts started to be made on a massive scale and just delivered to the supermarket all ready to go. And that really was the death blow for independent butcher shops, because the convenience, the price, the scale offered by the supermarkets, well, a small local butcher just couldn't compete with that. And then we roll into today, where we have lost those members of our community. We've lost those skills out of our community. So let's talk about what we have lost from this change in our culture to getting everything from the supermarket. Today, less than 5% of all meat sales go through an independent butcher, which is an astonishingly low number. So what we gained convenience when we moved to a supermarket system, and we gained economy of scale. So prices could be lower, although they don't seem that low anymore, do they? But anyway, that's a completely different topic. So we gained convenience. We gained going to one place and getting everything that we thought we needed, and off we went. But what we lost from just gaining that convenience was so much. We lost a connection to people in our community. We lost a huge amount of knowledge. That knowledge is being lost. In some cases, it is lost. The knowledge of all of the different ways an animal can be cut up into meat. Really, when you go to the supermarket, you're only buying the standard cuts, the things that the factory knows everyone is going to buy. But it used to be that the butcher would know how to cut up all sorts of quirky different things and be able to tell you how to cook them so they would be delicious. So we now waste a huge amount of every animal that gets processed because there is no longer the knowledge and the understanding of what to do with those quirky cuts. And while we have lost that expert knowledge, the expert butcher who knows what they were doing and could tell us about it, we have lost knowledge ourselves because we are no longer exposed to different cuts of meat. So we don't know what to do with it. We just go and we buy the same thing over and over again because the information is not available to us. We don't have anyone to give us confidence, to make us push our boundaries a little bit and try something different. So we as people have lost knowledge on what to do with different cuts of meat, how to cook something for a long time, whether it should be dry roasted or whether it should be braised, whether something is a quick cook or not. How many times have you bought something you weren't really sure what to do with and you weren't that happy with the end result because you didn't cook it right? And how could you know what to do when you can't just ask the question? And something really awesome is happening here where I live, where there is a local butcher and there is a local meat processor, which is relatively recent in the last sort of 5 years or so, because they all left, they were all gone, and economically it's very difficult to make a go of it as an independent operator. But there is a local butcher, there is a local meat processor, and I can go and buy meat from them, and I can ask the question. I can look at a package of meat with a name on it that I don't recognize, and I can say, what is this cut? And the person behind the counter can tell me and can advise me on what to do with that cut to make it delicious. And that is so important. It is so important to me that I go quite out of my way to make sure that I access that meat. I don't buy the meat at the supermarket. I go to the local butcher so I can ask them the questions, so I can find different cuts, so I can learn new skills and gain new knowledge. And I hope that that is something that can come about for more towns and more places, because it is a really meaningful part of our lives that we can start pulling back in. We can start pulling that power away from the industrialization, from the corporations, and we can start giving the power back to local people serving their local communities.